Yeah. Right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the council meeting of Monday, the 3rd of July, 2023. Hard to believe we're halfway through the year already, and today is the first day with our new city ops. So welcome to all the new staff that have joined us and are going to help make the city look fabulous, feel fabulous. Great to have them on board. So just a reminder on health and safety, if the alarm sounds, we go out the back door there and assemble across the road from the building and await further instructions. Everyone just remind them that this meeting is being live streamed and the video is publicly available on YouTube, and remind everyone to turn their mobile phones onto silent. And Shad, welcome to you joining us online. Would you like to open for us with a karakia, please? Can't hear you, Shad. Just a minute. Can you hear us? No, we can't hear you. Have you connected with your audio, Shad? We can't hear you. Okay, I'll tell you what, Shad, while we sort out your audio, we'll get Anahira, we'll do the karakia.
Morena, kia inoi tātou. Tauaki rā te moana nei, e papaki kau ana ki te ākau tangata, ka kinga waka ka mauri te tohu, ki te arearenga o mau, he pauhononga mau, he pauhiringa mau, kia hirea ki te tika, kia hirea ki te pono, kia mau, kia ita, kia u, haumi e hui e, tā e ki e.
Thank you very much. So we'll just try and sort that out for you, Shad, and we'll carry on. So we've got no apologies. We have no one speaking in the public forum. We have no late items. We have no confidential business to be brought into open. We have no change to the order of business. That brings us to the minutes of the council meeting held on the 19th of June. Does anyone have any comments or questions or corrections to those? Bill's moved and Stephen seconded. I had nothing. All those in favour say aye. Aye. If you just want to raise your hand, thank you, Shad, and we'll just note that. Against? Carried, thank you. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? No, we have no deputations, presentations or petitions, and we have no recommendations from other committees. That brings us to the first item of business, and that's Anne coming up to us on council-controlled organisation board remuneration review. Welcome.
Morena. Just to declare a conflict of interest. So obviously my husband is on the board of Tourism Bay of Plenty. It wasn't intended that I present this report. Sanjana wrote the report. and she was supposed to present it on the 24th of July, but we moved it forward to the 3rd to leave everything for Te Manotaki o Te Papa. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in my rush to read the report and review it and get Gareth to approve it, I didn't notice some mistakes in the report, but I spotted them on Friday. And those mistakes would have meant that TBOT would have gone backwards in their remuneration. So I've just popped on your desk there some copies with the changes highlighted. So within the resolutions, the amount should be the highlighted ones, not the ones that went out in the public agenda. But other than that, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So that moves the trustees of Tourism Bay of Plenty to 13,500 per annum, the chair to 27,000 per annum, and the deputy chair to 16,875 per annum. Just to be clear.
Which makes the same increase that we had before, most of which is being funded by Western Bay of Plenty District Council.
I thought, personally, I found that the methodology really helpful. Did we do that, or was that an outside?
It's a Martin Jenkins framework that we've used before, and we just did it ourselves this time using the same framework.
No, it lays it out really well, and anyone who wants to query it can follow through the reasons for the different rates of remuneration. Yep. Any questions?
Well, I'm happy to.
Yep. Mike.
And as we did with BVL the other day, it's about setting up the CCOs on a reasonable basis. So that's why I see in terms of the remuneration levels being reasonable. But I did have a question in terms of the review of this. Will that occur then in 3 years' time when the next LTP cycle comes around? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You second it? Shads. Yeah. I can see. Yep, I've got it here. Shad, have we got some sound?
No.
No. Does he want to go out and come back in? Yeah, why don't you go out and come back in? See if that helps.
I'll message them.
So just while we're waiting for that, it's probably pertinent to note that all three CCOs have a busy year ahead. Actually, the next 3 years for all of those CCOs, really busy time. The art gallery with their exciting changes so that they open onto Masonic Park and the reorganisation inside. So they're moving into Devonport Road, opening in September, is it? September?
They actually had the blessing last week and they've started some exhibitions there now. So they're going to run the two premises concurrently to start with and just get people used to it. Yeah.
Bay Venues, of course, have a busy summer season coming up and working alongside TCC with on a number of those active reserve plans. And Tourism Bay of Plenty, of course, gearing up for hopefully our major summer with good weather and possibly the biggest AIMS games we've had since pre-COVID, with internationals now returning. So, yep. Have we got Shad back in? So let's see if we can, you're on mute at the moment. Let's see if we can hear you. You're still on mute by the looks of it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Right. Phew.
Oh, sorry.
So did you,
Yeah, I did. Just had a quick question. I support the paper, and I assume Bill's moved and Stephen second. I just had a question in relation to the co-ownership board. So there's no there's no remuneration required for the co-ownership board.
So you're meaning Te Manawataki o Te Papa Charitable Trust?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. As far as I know, no, there is no remuneration for that board.
Okay. Okay. No, that's fine. I assumed so, but I just wanted to double check.
Yeah.
okay, anything else? Right, all those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. I'm taking that's a hand up for aye. Sorry, I was a bit quick. Right, that brings us then to traffic and parking bylaw amendment number 45.
Kia ora tātou. I'll just do a quick introduction of the paper. So with a lot of construction activity in the city centre, both private and public, there are changes to the likes of loading spaces, taxi stands, and some parking spaces as well. And if we manage those under temporary traffic management, it's difficult for us to enforce, and they have been open to abuse and have been abused. So we've had a recommendation from between regulatory and our traffic management team that in order for that to function better for the city, for the users, and for our regulatory team, it would be good to introduce a bylaw on those for it to work better. So that's the intent of this paper, and the details are outlined in it. So taking it as read, and if there are any questions.
Anything into that?
Just apart from the fact that you'll see in the bylaw the revocation occurs at the end of the construction. So effectively you're only approving those changes for the duration of that construction activity. And then after that, they automatically drop away.
Yeah, so look, I have a real problem with this. First of all, it would have been helpful to have some maps showing exactly where it is. And secondly, I think we should be putting a date in for the end of these so that people are very clear how long they're in. You know my feeling about blocking off roads. No other major city in the country, I think, allows construction to flow onto roads. And the one on Harrington Street, we're going to have one side loading and one side construction. So 2 roads now affected, and traffic. I'm presuming, because I had to get out Google and have a look, I'm presuming, and I went and had a look this morning, I'm presuming that the loading means we've still got 2-way traffic on, I always get Hamilton and Harrington mixed up. Hamilton? Is it Hamilton? Which is the one that's by the old civic site, Te Manawataki site? It's Hamilton. So we've still got 2-way traffic on Hamilton with a loading zone alongside. So still 2-way traffic there. Is that right?
Yeah.
So this is why a map would have been helpful, showing where the traffic is.
So what we've tried to do, because we've got so many sites in very close proximity, we've got 3 sites on those 3 corners. We sort of prioritise which corridors can take a reduction in parking space, which streets must maintain full access. So Willow Street must maintain full pedestrian, walking, cycling, vehicle connectivity. Harrington and Hamilton, we can have some reduction in space for parking because we have to create a loading zone at some point. Unfortunately, the goods coming in need somewhere to pull up to unload with the crane. So it's that balance between, ideally you'd have the 3 sites at separate times, but given that they're together, we're just trying to balance how do we keep everything moving. So as far as I understand, we're keeping 2-way traffic, but taking some of that other space off to allow for that loading zone to occur.
And we can't put the loading zone where the crane is, so that you're only interfering with one road.
No, unfortunately, because the 2 sites, you've got one sort of north of Willow and one south or east and west of Willow, so which is why we've got 2 different loading zones occurring, because we've got Northern Quarter, the old Harrington car park, and then we'll have Civic. In an ideal world, you'd love to have a pull-in area on their sites, but in most cases they are building to the boundary, so there's just not physically the space within the site to allow a loading zone.
But other cities must cope with this. How do other cities? I mean, in Wellington, there's been construction over the last 10 years, and the roads aren't interfered with. The footpaths are, but they're not allowed to go onto the road.
So we're now requiring containerised walkways. So other cities have had that for a while, so we've now brought that in to allow that connection through. But generally, you'll find other cities still have a loading zone on road reserve at some point. It's just trying to minimise the impact of that as much as possible.
And where is the taxi stand going to? We've got another place that's been identified and worked through with downtown Tauranga and the hospos, because that's always been a point of contention with them.
So the taxi stand on Hamilton's just changing sides of the road, so we're putting it on the opposite side of the road. Yeah, so it's still adjacent to that hospo area.
So do we have any dates for completion that we can put into the bylaw?
We could find out what their indicative dates are. I think the reason that the team probably haven't done that is, as with all vertical construction, we find that it often runs late. And so if you've got a hard and fast date, it makes it very difficult for us to do enforcement later unless we come back and amend the bylaw again. So, but happy to do that.
The idea, that's the idea, because it puts a bit of pressure on the construction people as well as our staff to enforce. Otherwise, it just drifts on, and these are valuable parking spaces in our CBD.
And look, the team have had some pretty robust conversations with some of these development sites because, for instance, 90 Devonport, we're also aware that outside this building we've got construction underway as well. So we've sort of tried to get the best compromise between all of the sites.
Anyone else got any questions?
No, but really to reinforce the message, I think, which is very much around rigour on the construction sites to manage their sites within a reasonable envelope, and they can't just expect that they're going to get an ongoing licence from us, given that we've got a bylaw in place. And secondly, our enforcement team need to be on to making sure they enforce it properly as well.
And just a couple of comments, Chair, and really pleased to see the containers outside 90 Devonport on the footpath. In terms of other sites, I'm not naming them, but other sites in the CBD where they've taken over footpath and parking, are we able to go back and have some renegotiation on those matters, or is that a done deal?
Some of those sites were approved probably when we were a little bit more lenient in terms of use of that road space. We could definitely try and have a conversation, but I suspect they've probably structured their whole build plan on the scenario of using that space. But heading forward, we are a lot more rigorous with use of road space, and we're minimising it as much as possible. As I said, the sites that are really tricky is when they're building to the boundary, because they do need to often occupy some of the footpath space, particularly where they've got glass facades, because that goes on after the main structure goes up. But again, what we're trying to do with those is it's for a very limited time. So Northern Quarter, for instance, they can occupy that space for 6 months, and then they must provide that space back to us.
Just as a final comment, Chair, it's where they've occupied both the footpath and the parking. So we end up with a double whammy in the odd situation that's currently live.
You definitely won't see that occurring in future.
Question I have is then how is this worked through with the CBD team and the Gareth and Sean and Emily and so they are all linked into all of this?
Yeah, they are. So we have established a task force for the city centre, so that any changes that we implement for these development purposes is linked into Gareth's team as well.
So okay, well that's good to hear. So
and that team also, but that team also looks after all of the city centre, not just the developments that like Te Marawataki and 90 Devonport, but actually all the private developments, so that all of the city centre is covered by that team.
Because the reason, as I drove up there this morning, I thought, well, the traffic plan that was discussed had one way and one way, Harrington and Hamilton. It almost seems sensible to try and implement that at the same time as you're making these changes. I wonder why we aren't doing that if we're doing that later.
Yeah, so there's a bit of work to be done before we implement that. We're probably looking at 3 months away or something like that for the implementation. Would be my guess.
Well, I think for the very reason that Bill's talking about, we should have a date, because I'm aware of the one he's talking about, and that's gone on for longer than over a year now, isn't it? It's behind. They get behind, and there's no discussions about how they're going to continue. So for me, it needs a date on the end of it, both for the public's sake, but also so that we've got some leverage. Chad.
Thanks, Anne. I was just wanting to follow on from Bill's comment about Hamilton Street. It is a double whammy. I mean, we lose, we shift the taxi rank from one side of the road to the other, and we lose car parking. I know it's a balance between the developers being able to deliver their projects, but at the same time, we do lose parking across the city. I did have a question about the collection of fees. So I think in the report under the financial section, it talks about the collection of parking fees. So I assume that when those car parks are unavailable for the public, that we are collecting fees from the developers themselves for the use of that space.
Yeah, so when a developer wants to use a car park area, they pay the full daily rate for that car park for the duration of its occupation. So they pay $32.50 per day per car park, and that's a cost that they incur because effectively we've lost revenue through them using that space.
Yep. And just to follow on from Anne's comment about a date, putting dates on the end of these occupancies, I kind of wonder as well whether we include some monitoring around that.
What sort of monitoring?
Well, ongoing conversations with the developers about. So if we put an end date on it, are there challenges? Are there slippages? Are there issues moving forward for some of these developments?
Or can they move out earlier?
Yeah. So yeah,
look, we can. Okay, we can definitely put dates on, because when they put these approvals in, we give them a corridor access request, so they have definite dates on those corridor access requests. So we can just tag the date to those dates. Monitoring, we can do. We are very reliant on the developers probably being honest about their rate of progress, but a couple of these sites are council related, so we'll probably be able to get more accurate data from those two.
I would hope so. All right. Any other questions? Someone like to move that, Bill? I just wonder whether we need to add in, so we receive it and adopt them. Yeah. So maybe we're just to see that these will be amendments will be date. We'll have a completion date or maximum date added. So Bill's moving that. Stephen seconding it. Anything further? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. And there, yeah, that's all right. Okay, so that brings us to the Transport System Plan Operating Framework.
I'll do a quick introduction. We've got Sean Jones dialing in from Auckland as well. He's the program manager for the TSP. So he's going to run through just a few slides that explains a little bit of the detail that sort of underpins the update of the Transport System Operating Framework. And what that does is basically a model that sits under, well, it actually, at the highest level, it starts with the with the UFTE document, the Urban Form and Transport Initiative, which is the future state of the city, basically in terms of growth areas, the connected centres concept and transport, and under that is the transport system framework, which outlines a number of projects that will deliver on the outcomes sought by the Urban Form and Transport Initiative. And that needs technical input, which is what this is. So the transport model that underpins that highlights. It outlines what the level of service is today, what the desired level of service is in the future, with including all modes, and what then the gap analyses. It creates a gap analysis that then can generate the projects that we need to implement in order to meet that future state, whether it's mode shift, cycling, walking, transport, port access, all those sorts of things. And it takes into consideration government policy statements, things that have shifted over time since we did the last version of it. So it's an updated one, and the timing of it now is critical for us, with us developing the long-term plan, but also with the development of the new regional land transport plan, which is firing up and which will be locked in next year, so March next year. So this all leads to a long-term plan for the transport network for Tauranga City and the sub-region.
I'll just quickly cover off and then hand across to Sean. Just to make clear that this is an update. So the original Transport System Operating Framework was done about 2 years ago when TSP was first sort of developed. And so Sean and the team have recently gone through and updated it. Specifically, the timing was targeted to hit our long-term plan requirements. So the long-term plan that sits there has taken on board the TSOF version 2 priorities. But yeah, I just want to thank Sean and the team, because they had a really, really tight time frame to get the update done. We said after version 1 that we would never give them that little time, and then we shortened it again. So the team have worked really hard to get this document through. So thanks to the team. I'll pass across to you, Sean.
Great. Well, you can all hear me? Do a sound check. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Thanks for taking the time to run through this. Several of you have probably already seen this presentation, so apologies, I've been through it several times. Am I sharing my screen? Is that how this works?
Yep, that's how it works.
Okay, I'll just sorry, you just need to give me a second. I thought it would be up on the screen. So
Is it the presentation that's in the agenda, or is it something different?
it is that one. It's fine. I've got it here now. So
You're right. You're right.
yep. Just had to open it. Okay. You can all see my screen. Good. Okay.
Yes, that's up. Thank you.
Good stuff. So our journey, that's our tag phrase. I'll move through this fairly quickly and allow some time at the end for questions. So our journey, and this really is our purpose statement. So we've been working through several key messages for TSP, and connecting our communities with sustainable, safe and smart journeys is our purpose statement. And then there's some further words there around what TSP is, a partnership, and how we're working. It's a collaborative approach. So here you can see the partners that are involved in TSP, which includes the infrastructure providers, the service providers, which is Regional Council, and then our key partners in terms of Priority 1, the ports, and tangata whenua representation. As Nick touched on, this follows it delivers on strategic outcomes, and so this shows the strategic alignment between smart growth, AFTI, which is currently going through the smart growth strategy refresh, and then TSP delivers the transport services and infrastructure needed. But we thought it would be worth putting a bit of context around the governance of TSP. So on the left there, you can see how it's strategic alignment, and there's been a recent refresh to how smart growth is structured, with our independent chair, Dean Kimpton, being a non-voting member of SLG, which is Smart Growth Leadership Group. And then on the right, you can see tactical delivery of the transport outcomes. So we've got a governance group, which includes our independent chair and the executive representation from the partners. Our partner management group, which is myself as the chair and the transport director levels. And then the partners deliver on the infrastructure outcomes. So onto the program that we're talking about today. So the refresh, as was mentioned, it's building on the original TSP program that was delivered a few years ago. And the objective was to reflect the latest policy settings, because these things change over time. It reflects national and regional objectives. We wanted to make sure it's prioritised and achievable, and funding and affordability is a key objective. So we just wanted to highlight some of the key pressures that have had to be factored into the program. So policies have changed around emissions and BKT. It doesn't mean that fundamentally changes the transport system operating framework, but it does have an impact on how we are prioritising. There's been the constraints enabling growth are affecting land supply costs. Affordability is down, and that's primarily due to construction inflation, which continues to run at very high levels. Funding availability is down with a constrained NLTF, which we're all aware of. And several of our projects, the key projects that deliver on AFTI outcomes, they've benefited from definition of the business case phase, so we know more about what is needed, but that scope, it's resulted in scope change and cost increase. So these things all put pressure on what that program looks like. So here we just run through, this is the process. I won't go into too much detail, but we have essentially refreshed the investment objectives, which is those green boxes on the left, looking at our operating gaps. We've gone through and reviewed the program, making sure that it's fit for purpose. We've used modelling, we've refreshed the modelling, we've refreshed the costs and mapping benefits, and then we've packaged it up, and then that's our updated program, which has been delivered in draft for use in the LTP for Tauranga City Council, and will continue to be used for developing the RLTP and LTPs for the other partner councils, and it'll also be used by Whakatahi to develop their state highway improvement program. And then the second part of that is that it's used for a VKT reduction program. So here, when we're looking at how we make our investment decisions, we need to run through an investment logic process. So you look at your problems, what are your benefits if you solve those problems, and then that flows through into investment objectives, which get used to prioritize your projects. In the previous one, there was 3: access, safety, and enabling urban growth. As a result of the initial work looking at policy changes, we pulled emissions out that were sort of embedded in the other 3 and made it a separate investment objective, and made the urban growth more around sustainable urban growth, which factors in some of the broader outcomes that you achieve by doing good quality urban development. And this is a summary of the program. So it's a 30-year, 7.9 billion plus PT services investment program, and consists of 84 prioritized projects. The 10-year program is about 2.8 billion, and that plus PT services, and that's important for timelines around LTPs and RLTPs. We've got 13 committed projects, which is around 1.5 billion, and it's more than $200 million forecast annual expenditure, which is a little bit more than what's getting spent now, but it is achievable. Then there's it's worth noting 5.1 billion uncommitted capex, plus an additional 45 million per annum PT services beyond the 10 years. So there's a significant future investment required, and it supports over 40,000 additional dwellings and jobs over that 30-year period, and enabling economic growth and transport movement balanced with VKT and emissions reductions. So the program, which is as Nick mentioned before, the Transport System Operating Framework is a model that brings in the existing and future land use settlement patterns. It brings in the current network. It's a model that brings in levels of service, and one of the outputs of that model is the program. So the program that we've developed consists of 4 key tables. We've got committed projects. We wanted to highlight because before TSOF 1, there was virtually no projects. So it shows that there's been significant progress made over the previous 3 years. We've got complementary projects because this sits in a network of a complex network of various activities that are currently underway. Strategies, policies, and studies which inform future decision making around what needs to be done and where, and then the proposed list proper, which is the list of the activities that need to be, the infrastructure projects that need to be delivered. So these are the tables. I'm not going to run through all of these, but we've got the committed projects, complementary projects, so things like spatial plans, low cost, low risk programs, emissions reduction plans. These all are critical connecting pieces of work. And so we're working with the teams that are delivering these projects as well. It's worth noting we're integrated into the smart growth strategy. We're working on the spatial plans, etc. We've got the strategies and policies. The coloured coding represents the partner that will be delivering these activities, and so it shows that this is the reason that we have TSP, because it's a collaborative effort and there's multiple parties delivering on the outcomes. And then this is the full program, and you probably can't even read it, but essentially it's got projects on the left. It's prioritized by high, medium, and low rather than ordered 1 to 84. And the reason for that is the RLTP requires us to prioritize that way. So it lines up with that. And then we've got how it aligns with the TSP objectives, the 4 objectives we talked about earlier. Then what's next, and then the program. And we've broken that down into the LTP, the 3, 10, and 10-year plus timelines. We have some maps here that show graphically where the projects are. Public transport network, the future cycle network. So just top line messages here, we've got, the transport system operating framework is a high, no, I have said the acronym once, sorry, Anne, is a high quality model. All partners have collaborated on the project. We haven't seen significant change between version 1 and version 2, which is a good sign that we've tested the system properly, and we understand where the priorities land. And funding and cost pressures put investment at the same level as version 1 at risk. And this endorsed program is subject to minor changes through LTP, RLTP, and potentially on the VKT program side of things, which is a natural process where we start to constrain the program based on funding availability and test. With the VKT program, we're going to be testing some of the key assumptions around mode share and etc. So next steps, we're looking at getting this endorsed by the partners, and then that will then feed into the funding processes that are underway. And I think that's the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Yes, there are. Okay, go, Stephen.
Thanks for the presentation, Sean, and thanks to the team for putting a hard effort into getting this done in a relatively short time frame. It's appreciated. But I think I do wonder whether or not the time frame might have pressurised some of the key considerations. I do have a range of questions, but I guess at a high level, my questions are around, or my concern is around, to what extent this is reflecting the priorities of the sub-region strategically, and whether or not, and in particular the Western Corridor and the focus on, as you're aware, we've got an SDP process underway with Tauranga at the moment. The Tauranga City Council has already stated its priority around the Western Corridor, and the sub-region last week unanimously supported the acceleration of the process for State Highway 29, and that's all centred on enabling faster urban residential development in the west connected to the city. And I don't get that flavour when I read through the presentation and also the TSP report. For example, the SDP is not mentioned. And then when I look at the TSP refresh high priority activities on the map that you showed, which colours where all of the projects are, Tutumu is highlighted as a future development area, and I understand that's part of UFTI, but the growth areas in Tauranga seem to be quite significantly understated on that map. I can see Tauranga West. I can maybe see the Tauranga Business Estate extension, but I don't see any of the other areas of development. In fact, the development in Mokoroa looks larger than the Western Corridor. So I guess I'm a little bit worried that whilst the process might be strong and embedded in kind of all the ticks and boxes of modelling analysis, I'm not seeing clear alignment with our kind of urban growth strategy. And therefore, the project prioritisation comes into question. as to whether or not sufficient weighting has been made of that change in direction. Now, I recognise it's a work in progress and the STP hasn't been finalised, but the indications we've had from Tauranga is they see no great showstoppers at a high level. We are awaiting, from a smart growth point of view, the outcome of that process before it becomes embedded in smart growth. So I can understand that TSP wouldn't have had those formal signals coming through, but informally we do have a strong direction. So I'm wondering to what extent that would actually change the outcome of the process if you had a much more strategic emphasis on the Western Corridor. I then have a number of questions of detail, which I'll perhaps leave for you to comment on the high level response.
Sure. I think I'll make a comment on that, and then maybe Nick or Marty have got other thoughts to add there. So I think it's a very good point about the Western Corridor, and it has been a point of conversation as an ongoing with our working group. So we're consistently testing to make sure that what we're putting forward is future-proofed for a scenario where something changes. However, it's important to note TSP is a delivery, it's a tactical delivery partnership. And so we take our signals from UFT and smart growth. So we can test and we can check in, and we are doing that in an informal way. And when there's a formal decision that comes from smart growth around the Western Corridor being the growth priority, then we will need to go through a process of updating things. But the same thing applies with the road pricing strategies and other initiatives that are in the process of getting worked through. We're aware of them, and we look at the implications of those from a risk perspective, but we can't necessarily bring them into this program at this stage. So, and in terms of the SDP, it's a good point, and I want to make sure that we're linked in with them. And I believe that our projects will deliver the outcomes that the SDP will be after. When we get down into delivering the actual project, then some further detail comes in around what gets built on those corridors. And Nick or Marty, do you have anything further to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And perhaps Christine and Nick can help me out here, but this goes back to the way UFT was developed and then the TSP and the purpose and the role of TSP and how they're interconnected with UFT. So we've always struggled to get strong visibility and connection of the state highway network as part of UFT. Interestingly, UFT was set up essentially as a result of the previous failure, if you like, of the Tauranga transport plan. And so UFT started off as a transport project, but morphed into an urban growth plan. And so as a result of that, we initiated the TSP. But we've always struggled to have strong visibility and connection of the state highway investment as part of that. And I think what you're seeing through this revised TSP is just a continuation of that. And of course, there's always been a degree of tension about where state highway investment should go and the prioritisation of that. And I think that tension still continues. So and I think that's what you've seen through this TSP is a degree of silence about the prioritisation of the state highway network and a greater focus of what you might call the more localised network connections. So, Christine.
That's a very good summary. I think the other thing with the history of TSP is it was initiated by TCC and then the partners came along. Oh, he's got a droopy problem. So yeah, originally TSP was TCC initiated try to fill the gap. That was because of the GPS, the government policy statement changes, and the fact that we had an urgent need to get a program that met government requirements so that we could get funding. The other partners came on board, but it's taking time, and it is way better now to get a whole engagement of all of the partners and joint ownership of the TSP. And I think it's just part of the shifting over time to make it a total network, including the state highway. And Waka Kotahi always have their eye on, they are part of a national planning and funding program. And a lot of their program is more about interregional routes. And we're talking about things that are very much in the sort of the state highway network providing an interregional function, but also a local function. So it's a little bit different compared to a lot of their other state highways. So I think that's the other thing to bear in mind. So I think it's just part of an ongoing journey. We're a lot further ahead now than we were in terms of it being considered a joint plan, and we just need to keep working on that. So I think there's some really good points, and we can pick all of those up and incorporate them into it.
Yeah, well, that's between CJ, Marty, and Sean. That's a good description of the background. What I do think, though, that we can take away is the point around. This is the first presentation to governance to get the TSP or TSOF Transport System Operating Framework signed off, and I think it is an opportunity to tell the story about the outcomes that we are trying to achieve. And we have in the paper tried to connect it to growth areas, development, that sort of thing. But I think we can emphasise the outcomes, not necessarily change the priorities in the tables per se, because they, in effect, they are what they are by the process that we've gone through. But I don't think we necessarily highlight enough the outcomes that they will generate. And so there's an opportunity here to take away when we do present it to Waka Kotahi, Western Bay and Regional Council.
I think just while we stay on this, and then we can dive down into the detail, but I think there is a step missing in here, and that is that we should be having this discussion before it comes for endorsement, because and I see Sean's top line messages, priorities have not changed significantly between TSOF V1 and V2. Well, actually, they may well have at the governance level, at the individual councils level, the priorities may well have changed. And they have, yes. And so when you look at the processes, TSP's operating independently with staff and representatives involved, and then you bring it to governance for endorsement. I think there needs to be another step whereby we come and we have these discussions before it's finalised and then put up for endorsement, so that some of that pushing and pulling can be done without the necessity to endorse it today, because my feeling is it should be lying on the table while we sort some of this. And I know from the regional council's perspective, they would like that opportunity to question from a governance perspective as to whether those priorities are right or not. So I do think in the process, and it is an evolving process, that we do need to think about that.
Chair, I totally agree. And we're missing the kind of strategic prioritisation from what I can see. But we're also missing actually what does this deliver? So there's no information in the report about, if you take each of those 4 outcomes, what's going to be better and by how much? So there's no transport modelling data, there's no kind of this will open up X number of areas of the city for housing, this will result in a XYZ reduction in carbon emissions or VKT. There's none of those sort of key outcome statistics. So to me, we're looking, at a process, but it's not clear what the outcome of that process is, other than a continuation of contribution towards a sort of strategic AFTI plan, which is, some years dated now. which I think is why we've ended up with a scenario that's not much different to the original plan, because we're still actually largely working on the original plan. So yeah, I think that kind of, it really underlines that the process is not keeping pace with the strategy, to me. And I think that opportunity for governance interaction on that would enable that testing to occur to give us more comfort. I mean, when I look through the projects, you know, they're all there. But whether or not they're in the right order and whether or not they have the right priority, and there's a lot of high priorities. So, you know, whether or not we'll actually be able to fund and deliver those correctly or not, I'm not sure. So, Chair, I fully support. I think we should let this lie on the table now. I think we need a governance workshop, and I think that needs to be held with the other entities as well. And then we'll test some of the thinking in around this and hopefully shape it up for endorsement, but we're not quite ready yet.
Just add, and then I know Bill wants to talk, but I think for me the weakest bit is the sustainable urban growth. And when I look at some of the particular ones I'd pick out would be Te Papa active mode off-road, which is cycling. That's only medium. And yet I would have thought, if we're talking sustainable urban growth and we're talking intensification of the Te Papa, I would have thought from that outcome, let's call it result rather than outcome, that's a bit more positive. I was reminded of that yesterday, that I always used to insist they were results, not outcomes. You know, that speaks more to that sustainable urban growth. And then the other one that I noticed was park and rides, and particularly in Papamoa, are only medium in here. And I would have thought, again, if we're talking about multimodal sustainable urban growth, which is then enabling, that park and rides would have been quite high priority. So to me, that's the weakest part of the modelling. And I'm always questioning, what does that actually mean? What do people mean? The words look nice, but what does that actually look like on the ground? And when I look through this, I don't actually get a picture of what that means, given the priorities that we've now got, because some of that multimodal and that alternate forms of transport don't feature with the priority that perhaps they should be. So then we get on to buses, yes.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. I think the if you like, the program is still arguably operating in the strategic context that existed when TSP was first signed up to. And if I could use perhaps Tauranga West as an example, and the enabling works, for one of our partners, housing outcomes wasn't even part of the criteria. Now, that was probably only 18 months ago that we were having that discussion. And so the context has changed, where I believe actually those sustainable housing outcomes are now an important criteria to all of our partners. And really, those discussions have really only come to fruition probably in the last 6 months. And it's become a reality. And with the strategic business case for State Highway 29 bringing the opportunities to light, it does feel like this TSOF is lagging the strategic sort of direction context. Whether or not we can get agreement in the time required by our partners as to what a reprioritisation might look like, I don't know, but a workshop might help us get some of the way there.
I think it might be a lesson learned for me, because we around this governance integration, we had planned to have that first session with and aligned with Tauranga long-term business case, but that was probably a bit too optimistic to try and have those two workshops at the same time. And that would have been, at least it would have given us a chance to have that conversation. But maybe we could have even done it a little bit earlier and in a separate forum. So apologies for that. We'll make sure that we get something sorted. And just on the priorities that you were talking about, we have done a quantitative assessment. So this is an MCA process, multi-criteria assessment, where there's a whole lot of detail in the back around how those priorities got developed. So we're more than happy to go in there and drill in a bit in a bit of detail, because as you find they are subjective to some extent. So we, you know, if they are a priority, we can actually bring them up, and that needs us to all dive into the detail a little bit. But I'm more than happy to do that if we want to go through that process.
Look, I appreciate those comments, Sean, and I don't think we should be doing that today. If we're going to let this lie and have a workshop, then that's the time to go and have a look at some of that, and bring that up to date. I'm going to let Bill have a go because he's dying to say something, and
he used to chair smart growth.
And he used to chair smart growth, yes.
Thanks, Chair. Just picking up the commentary around a governance session, I think it'd be worthwhile, Chair, that is a joined up governance session, so we get the 3 governance partners together and work through, because we might as well put all the stuff on the table and work through it, as opposed to doing on a stage step-by-step basis individually. So I think that's absolutely key. Picking up Stephen's earlier point in terms of, and I'm looking at the growth, the refresh high priority activities and that map, and the concern that it's not actually showing the full picture. And whilst I appreciate the TSP is really responding to what's already agreed, whether that's been through UFD or subsequent arrangements, I think as part of it, though, we should have what is in the relevant parts of UFD, the plan, the subsequent decisions that have been made to include the housing and the investigations into the wider growth areas. Now, whilst that hasn't landed yet, it's still part of the context in an overall picture. So I think we should, and it would assist in terms of having 1 or 2 plans that actually showed that, and then that provides the context for the TSP at this point in time, because there is a lot of activity, and I think it needs to show that clarity, because we talk about and resolved around the Western Corridor, so we've got a whole lot of messaging on that. Some of the community will see this and then say, well, but aren't you looking at a whole lot of range of other areas for investigation, commitments or whatever, and our thinking around not just our thinking, but where we're heading for the LTP for 24 to 34 in terms of the Western Corridor, the intensification to Papa Peninsula. We've got to really have that very clear, because that then helps in our prioritisation discussion, which we will have hopefully around some of that joined up governance type workshop. So really keen, appreciate where all this has come from, but I think we just need to add to that in that strategic context. The other, as a result of that joined up, without preempting that joined up governance discussion, I note in the covering report that there is reference to the use of this, obviously, for our own LTP, but also for the Regional Land Transport Plan. And then in one of the paragraphs, it references the significance of this in terms of the partners having an agreed view and commitment, and then the need for that to provide the basis for a submission and discussion on the RLTP. I'd like us to get to the stage, this is my aspiration, that we actually have a joined up submission to that process. And I understand previously, whilst we've had a lot of joined up discussions, we've all then had separate submissions. So I think we actually need to try and give life to not just the governance discussion, well, what does that mean in terms of the 3 partners, and then the other agencies associated, in terms of being very clearly joined up around that Regional Transport Committee table in terms of a submission. And I think then picking up Stephen's commentary around modelling in that, given the level of detail and the work that's gone into the sub-region around transport, and that's why I see the joined up submission as key, surely that must count for something in terms of the discussion and the prioritisation around the regional transport table, and then that level of evidence and information that then goes forward in turn to Kotahi in terms of the NLTF. So it's really just making sure we've got our joined up ducks to begin with, and hopefully that providing some influence as we work through the process, both sub-regionally, regionally, and then with that national conversation. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, so we're probably going to have a motion that receives the report and then lets it lie on the table whilst we call an urgent workshop. And I was thinking the Smart Growth Leadership Group, but I wonder whether we just, because that involves all the Crown and everyone, so I just wonder whether we just call together interested councillors from the three councils and the tangata whenua reps from Smart Growth to sit round the table. And that means any of the elected representatives who are interested can come. If they're not interested, well, do you want to keep it as Smart Growth?
Well, I think we can start with the Smart Growth framework, and then those agencies that don't necessarily have the same, I guess, mind you, they all have an interest.
They all have an interest.
Yeah, they do. I think we should start.
Maybe we use the Smart Growth Leadership Group, and then but then I don't want to cut out other councillors, so that you then get them going back to their council and they don't agree with it. So any other interested councillors who want to join, but the basis is the Smart Growth Leadership Group.
Yeah, I think we can get the strategic advisor to organise something quickly and perhaps coordinate this with Sean and Dean Kimpton to do this pronto. What are our timelines for this, Sean? When do we need all of the councils or partners to sign off on it?
The submission to RLTP, I mean, if it comes through with endorsement, maybe it's through Smart Growth endorsement or something, that submission, then each partner technically has to submit their own through whatever systems they use. But if there's an overarching endorsement from that group, I think that's going to be an awesome idea. But when RLTP timelines are, I'll have to double check whether it's September, October, or August, September. But timelines have been pushing out on the RLTP just because of things like the GPS having not been delivered, and now it's coming up towards an election. So some of those timeframes are changing every week. So I'll double check. But if we can do something in July, that would be great.
Isn't the more pressing issue that we will be consulting on our long-term plan? We were trying to get agreement with the partners prior to us going out and consulting. So that in my view is the issue that drives the timeline on this.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, who knows I don't know off the top of my head the consultation dates for LTP.
We were trying to have our draft LTP budgets finished by mid-August, I think, and because we adopt our draft consultation document on the 11th of September.
Really need to see if you can get something together in the next couple of weeks, and I'm quite happy. I won't be here, but I'm quite happy that my guys can handle it. But it is quite a feat to try and get everyone together. But perhaps if we say the next couple of weeks, that could be the final endorsement.
That's fine.
Yeah, that would be good. Okay. Did we want to? I just had a couple of other questions I wanted on detail, and I think Stephen does. But I was just concerned to see PT hubs. Now, is this just a terminology? Because we've had interchanges, we've had super stops, we've had hubs now. So what do we mean by hubs?
I think one of the names of these projects is very confusing for me as well, to be honest. But they're sometimes legacy names. There's technical issues with the names, with the systems and everything. But the point is, we've done a gap analysis in the transport network. We need a place where people can gather and get on buses. So as part of the business case process, they start to take the concept of the solution to the gap, which is and it's called a transport hub, and they work through what the detail of that looks like, if that makes sense. And that's the case with a lot of these project line items, is that they still are subject to scoping.
Yeah, and for us, that they can be quite expensive, or they can be just a super stop that needs a certain length of road and some infrastructure. So it would be helpful. I mean, I just having a look at some of the costings for these. I guess my question was, Nick, if we have to start buying pieces of land and providing services then to service buses, is there a process that we go through saying, because if we purchase land in the CBD, that's hugely expensive. And some of these hubs are in quite major retail areas. So again, it will be expensive. So do we go through the process saying, well, okay, this is a big piece of infrastructure that is required. Is that part of delivering the service? In which case, should the costs be shared with those who are providing the service? And so it doesn't fall just on our ratepayers, but the people who are providing the services, the regional council, who get subsidised by central government to a large extent. So how do we share that? And that really comes back to, what are these hubs actually requiring? And I thought that we were going to a through service rather than an interchange type where people have to wait a long period of time, but this doesn't indicate that that's the case.
And I guess that's the PT business case that's being worked on at the moment as well. So that will give us some of those outcomes that we will be looking for. But early indications are that you're right. It's sort of that not the big interchange type structures that will be needed, but more sort of a through service. That's where that seems to be heading. But we haven't got the final results on that yet, and so it's a bit of a chicken and egg here. We can't plan for it and cost it with the high degree of certainty before we know what sort of the services that we're providing. So that is the difficulty in it.
Sorry, Nick.
Oh, Sean.
I was just going to say the working group did work through each of those bus facilities individually and made an educated guess on what would be the form and function of those particular locations. And we've got the details of those because they were used as the basis for cost estimates. So we can drill into each one of those and tell you what the assumptions are behind each one, if necessary.
I think that would be helpful for the joint committee. I don't know when that next meeting.
I think we'll have all of those. What we'll do is we'll have all those spreadsheets and all the working information there available. So at the workshop we can drill in where we need to.
Okay. All right. You want to ask? Have you got more questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just touching on strategy before I go back into the detailed questions. One of the questions I guess I have, which you could think about for the workshop, Sean, is to what extent the modelling tests strategy. So, for example, we've identified the Western Corridor, certainly from our perspective, as the primary growth opportunity because of the land use transport integration. So if you were to tune up the investment in the Western Corridor and detune it elsewhere, would that produce a better result from all the 4 outcomes? To what extent was that tested? Or if you had a scenario where road pricing was a cornerstone of your transport investment program, to what extent would that change your investment priorities? I suspect it might change it quite considerably. So, I mean, we have a land use scenario that's driving the transport modelling, but at some stage you have to ask that question backwards. To what extent does the transport investment shape the land use? And I just don't know that our process is really looking through both lenses, because what we have is a series of projects that are kind of span right across the sub-region, and that's largely because we're trying to grow. Right, that's the essence of IFTI. It's trying to grow everywhere. And I guess fundamentally I'm asking the question, is that still the right land use development strategy for the sub-region? Because my gut tells me we can't afford it and we can't deliver it in the time frame. So I guess it's that high level questioning of the TSP process. So maybe think about that you don't have to answer it now, but maybe think about that for the workshop. It's kind of thinking about things in a different way.
We'll cover that we'll cover some work on model sensitivity in the workshop.
Yeah, great. I did have a question around the variable road pricing, which is in table 2.9. I was delighted to see it in there, funded for $3 million worth of investment. But then I was a little bit concerned when I saw the timelines. And I'm not quite sure what the blue and the orangey colour represent, but it's showing an investigation of variable road pricing starting in 24 and going out to 2033. I'm presuming that means implementation, in which case the budget won't be enough. Not quite sure what the table means.
I'm just finding that.
Trying to get there. It's on page 117 of our agenda.
Yep. Okay.
And it's about halfway down that table.
Yeah, so it's saying in the blue is in investigations. So that's the business case phase over the next 3 years, and implementation beyond that period. Because we
okay, so the 3 million is for the blue phase, yeah?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
That was provided. That was worked through with. We've had some engagement with the team that's been doing it, and in particular, Sarah Dove is in our working group. So she's been working on the variable road pricing from council side.
Okay, thank you. I do think that needs a little bit more receptiveness to urgency, because that might materially change the strategic direction. And then I guess my questions come down to, how does variable road pricing then link to the travel demand management component of the TSP? Because I would see them inherently interlinked, or potentially could be. And then the impact then on VKT, mode shift, managed lanes. So that those are all kind of linked up, but you don't get a feeling of that when you go through the priorities. They look like they're separate projects that are running in parallel, but maybe not talking to one another. So another question maybe for the workshop to think about. You don't need to answer that now. And then the other area, the freight strategy is around enabling and potentially through managed lanes, acceleration of freight through corridors, and that's how the level of service is improved. But it doesn't necessarily then address the needs of commercial business trips who will still be stuck in general traffic. And so just understanding the commercial business trip implications of the plan and whether or not those key arterials will provide a level of service that's adequate for basically the economic engine of our sub-region.
And that's been
Once again, lots of questions.
We've been conscious of that same question, Stephen, around making sure that our tradies can get from point A to point B in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
When they actually, not just in the middle of the day, when they need to. And so it's embedded in the solution. When we have mode shift and we can move people off the road, it frees up capacity and provides more reliable travel time for those that need to use it, because it's tradies, it's people that are in isolated communities that don't have access to PT. So we need to, and it's about moving a certain percentage of the population that can into alternative modes, so that the capacity that we're providing is there for people that need it.
So that's where the modelling outputs would be helpful to see. So you could actually see that the urban arterials are level of service, whatever they are, and that's improved from what they would have been. So the absence of that, I understand the theory, I understand the strategy, but it's not demonstrating the outcomes. That was all from me.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Shad, did you have anything you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I just had a question, a clarity question. Just in terms of the, on that slide, the future pipeline of projects in the list, where we've got Tauranga State Highway 2 Stage 1 and we've got Stage 2, how does this link in to the business case we signed off the other day? I mean, these staging.
Good question.
Stage 2 is 1.6 billion. So, yeah, just wanting to get some clarity on that.
Yeah, somebody raised that question in the working group the other day, actually, because this was prepared slightly before we saw that there were the 4 stages. Stage 1, I believe, is the stages 1 to 3 in that business case. So it'll be the bridge, the designation, and the PT connection between Tauranga and Barks Corner.
Yep.
And then where it says Stage 2, that will be the offline expressway.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, but support the comments of the other commissioners in terms of having that workshop and just making sure that we're all joined up.
Yeah, great.
But I do think we need to line up the terminology in the TSP with the terminology in the business cases, no matter what business cases they are. So everyone is very clear as to which bits we're talking about. Because when I struggled with it, having had pressed into my mind the stages of the business case, indelibly imprinted. It was quite different here. Bill.
Couple of things, Chair. Just in terms of this might be more for Christine and her team to think about for the workshop, there's the reference under the complementary projects to the future development strategy, and then says the way forward is to deliver outcomes. The last future development strategy ran aground because there wasn't that transport component. In fact, never got approved, and I think it's still lying on the table somewhere. So what I was looking for that future development strategy, it's much more connected in terms of what needs to be delivered from a transport perspective to actually make what's in that future development strategy occur. Now, it's linked into Western Corridor and all of that, but I think we've, as opposed to just another future strategy, is making sure there's a much greater degree of connectedness and lining up in terms of that and then the delivery.
I totally agree, and also we need to be clear about what is funded through the LTP and what forms part of an ongoing conversation around city deals or others, that you need these growth areas to accommodate your growth, and you need this transport investment to support that growth, but actually currently there's not a funding model that delivers it. So I think that's some of that conversation as well. So, and how much of that it's about, I mean, because a lot of that stuff's been moving very rapidly in parallel. So it's lining up the updated Smart Growth Strategy 2023, which will include the Future Development Strategy, the TSP and TCC's LTP, and then the conversations that you're having at a central level. And so because they're all moving quite quickly, we need to make sure we get this alignment. So it's a good point.
And just
Surely that's the purpose of the political champions as part of that future development to make sure.
It is. I'm
yeah.
just giving some, providing some clarity, Chair, that in the bowels or in the organisations that thinking is happening. And then just secondly,
I was just going to, sorry, just in response to that, just to give you some level of confidence, the team on TSP has been writing the sections for the transport. We've been involved in the workshops with Smart Growth. So we've written all of the work for the FDS, for Smart Growth.
Okay, no, thanks for that, Sean. And just my other point is in terms of, and I looked, it took me a while to find it because it was quite small, the future pipeline of projects, and it does have State Highway 29 corridor upgrade there, and it's in the time frames are in blue and brownish or whatever, and it's with Waka Kotahi. Just being very clear on the particular scope of projects, because I wasn't sure whether that was for all of the 29A or just that component from the lakes through to Barks Corner. So just some clarity around the scope of projects, and then notwithstanding that, making sure that there then is, and it comes down to priority of projects, that the business case work has been undertaken for all of that corridor, because it's the 29, that's what, been 7 years. These things take time, and that corridor is quite key in terms of the round the harbour route and also connecting up the Turret Road through to the Welcome Bay intersection, etc. So I just wanted to make sure that I think that's probably worthy part of the discussion at the workshop, but it was just a concern I had.
Well, I'll make a note of that and get the guys to make sure that they've got detail of the scope of that. What is it, 376 million? It's based on some assumptions, so they can outline those.
Right, anything else? Okay, so the motion would be that we receive the report, that it lies on the table, and that an urgent workshop through the Smart Growth Leadership Group be called, and Stephen will, then Bill will second that. And the invitation will go to all elected members so that any who want to attend to work through that. Okay, nothing further? All those in favour say aye. Okay, shared, against, carried. Thank you very much. Thanks, Sean.
Okay.
Sorry to do that to you this morning, but I think it's a good discussion, and I think the reality is that, as we've heard from the history, the TSP and UFTI actually are evolving, and that's a good thing. They're both dynamic, and the role of TSP within that is also now taking shape. And again, I think that's a good thing. So thank you very much. I know a huge amount of work's gone into that, and we appreciate that you've been pushed time-wise to do that. But I think we now have a very good base for the conversations that need to happen, and the opportunity to have a look at some more of that detail to be reassured that the modelling is actually taking into account the things that we think are important. So appreciate that.
Thank you for your time, and I look forward to this workshop. It's going to be great.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, so that brings us to, would someone like to move that we go into public excluded? Bill, for the reasons outlined in the agenda, and Stephen second. All those in favour say aye.